Winter held Vermont in its merciless grip, the land buried beneath layers of pristine white snow that stretched as far as the eye could see. Art Pendleton's weathered hands trembled slightly as he counted the meager stack of bills on his kitchen table. At 52, the beekeeper had grown accustomed to financial struggle, but this winter was proving exceptionally brutal. His honey sales had slowed to a trickle, and the bills kept arriving with alarming regularity. Electricity, heating, mortgage on the old family farmhouse that had seen better days. Art sighed deeply, his breath visible in the chilly kitchen. He had turned down the thermostat again to save on heating costs, choosing instead to wear 3 layers indoors. The ancient farmhouse creaked and groaned around him, as though sympathizing with his plight. Outside, the snow continued to fall in thick, lazy flakes, adding another inch to the already impressive accumulation. "At least you girls are staying warm," Art murmured, glancing toward the barn where his precious beehives were stored for the winter. He had invested in special insulation this year, using nearly the last of his savings to ensure his bees survived the bitter cold. The colonies had been struggling lately, another mysterious case of colony collapse that seemed to plague beekeepers nationwide. But Art couldn't bear to lose them. They weren't just his livelihood, they were his companions. 5 years ago, Martha had walked out, claiming she couldn't stand the predictability of their life anymore. 20 years of the same routine, Art, she had said, suitcase in hand. The same breakfast, the same conversations, the same quiet evenings. "I need more than this." The irony wasn't lost on Art. How unpredictable life had become since she left, though perhaps not in the way either of them might have anticipated. Art folded the bills and tucked them into an old cookie tin. He would worry about them tomorrow. Tonight, he needed to check on his bees one last time before turning in. He pulled on his heavy coat, wrapped his scarf around his neck, and stepped out into the frigid evening air. The glitches, as Art had come to call them, had started about 3 years ago. Small things at first, tools that weren't where he had left them, radio stations that mysteriously changed on their own, broadcasting strange static that sometimes sounded almost like words. Then came the weather anomalies, sudden patches of fog that appeared only around his farm, snow that melted in perfect circles, winds that blew in impossible directions. Art had wondered briefly if he was losing his mind, but the phenomena seemed too consistent, too real. Eventually, he had simply accepted them as part of his peculiar existence, these reality glitches that no one else seemed to notice or care about. The barn door protested loudly as Art pushed it open. Inside, the temperature was noticeably warmer than outside, though still cold enough to see his breath. The gentle, muted humming of thousands of bees in winter cluster greeted him, a comforting sound that always put his mind at ease. Art moved methodically between the hives, checking the insulation, making sure no drafts had found their way in. "Just a few more months, ladies," he whispered to the nearest hive. "Then spring will come, and you can get back to work." As he was finishing his rounds, something unusual caught his attention. The old ham radio he kept in the barn, a relic from his father's days, had switched itself on and was emitting a strange, rhythmic static unlike anything Art had heard before. Another glitch, but more pronounced than usual. As he approached the radio to switch it off, a chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Outside the barn window, Art noticed one of the apple trees in his neglected orchard had suddenly burst into full bloom, its branches heavy with pink-white flowers despite being buried in snow and the temperature hovering well below freezing. As he watched, transfixed, the blossoms withered and died within seconds, leaving the tree as bare as it had been moments before. Art swallowed hard. In all his years of experiencing these strange occurrences, nothing had felt quite so ominous. He hurriedly finished his chores and returned to the farmhouse, casting nervous glances over his shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that something significant was about to change. That night, Art's sleep was fitful, disturbed by dreams of falling stars and whispered conversations in languages he didn't understand. He woke before dawn, restless and uneasy, and decided to check the hives again. The snowstorm had intensified overnight, transforming the world into a white blur. Art struggled against the wind, following the familiar path to the barn by memory more than sight. As he approached, something caught his eye, a strange glow emanating from beneath the snow about 20 yards to the right of his barn. The light pulsed, faintly blue-green and utterly alien against the stark white landscape. Art changed course, curiosity overriding caution. When he reached the spot, he noticed something even stranger. Despite the blizzard conditions, the snow in this small area wasn't accumulating. Instead, it seemed to melt upon contact with whatever lay beneath, creating a perfect circle of exposed ground that radiated surprising warmth. Art knelt and began to dig, his bare hands protected from the cold by the mysterious heat source. The earth beneath was not frozen as it should have been in midwinter, but soft and yielding. After removing about a foot of soil, his fingers struck something solid, something metallic but warm to the touch. With increasing urgency, Art continued to dig until he had unearthed a small chest, roughly the size of a shoebox. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, crafted from a lustrous metal that seemed to shift between silver and gold depending on how the light hit it. Intricate patterns were etched across its surface, reminiscent of circuitry but far more complex, more organic. Most remarkably, the chest exhibited no signs of rust or degradation, despite having been buried in the earth. Art hesitated only briefly before attempting to open it. To his surprise, the lid yielded easily, as though the chest had been waiting for him. As it opened, a soft light spilled out, illuminating Art's weathered face with an ethereal glow. Inside, nestled among what appeared to be translucent crystals that emitted a gentle, pulsating light, lay 3 small creatures. At first glance, they resembled lizards, no longer than Art's index finger, with delicate limbs and tails that curled protectively around their bodies. But as Art looked closer, he realized they were unlike any reptiles he had ever encountered. Their bodies were covered in scales that shimmered with iridescent colors, one primarily blue, another amber, and the third a deep emerald green. Tiny protrusions extended from their shoulders, unmistakably wings, though currently folded tightly against their bodies. The creatures were alive, but barely. Their breathing was shallow and irregular, their miniature forms trembling violently. Art realized with a start that despite the relative warmth of the chest, these beings were suffering from severe cold. The crystals that surrounded them seemed to be failing, their light growing dimmer by the second. Without fully understanding why, Art felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness toward these strange, vulnerable creatures. He gently closed the chest, cradling it against his body, and hurried back toward the farmhouse, all thoughts of checking his bees temporarily forgotten. Once inside, Art placed the chest near the wood stove, which he stoked to full capacity, disregarding his usual frugality with firewood. He then gathered every spare blanket in the house, creating a nest of warmth around the mysterious container. After some hesitation, he carefully removed the 3 tiny beings from the chest, placing them in a shallow wooden bowl lined with soft cloth. The crystals he arranged around the bowl, noticing that they seemed to glow brighter in proximity to the heat. All day, Art tended to the creatures, using an eyedropper to administer tiny amounts of his precious honey water mixture when they showed signs of consciousness. By evening, their conditions had stabilized somewhat, their breathing more regular, their trembling less severe. Art watched in fascination as the blue one opened its eyes for the first time, revealing pupils with a vertical slit surrounded by irises that glowed like sapphires. "What are you?" Art whispered, but the creature only blinked slowly before closing its eyes again. Over the next few days, Art dedicated himself entirely to nursing the mysterious beings back to health. He neglected his own needs, sleeping in short bursts on the couch near the stove to maintain the fire at all hours. His regular chores were reduced to the bare minimum. Quick trips to check on the bees, hasty meals prepared one-handed while holding the eyedropper in the other. The creatures recovered with remarkable speed. By the 3rd day, all 3 were alert and active, exploring the confines of their makeshift nest with evident curiosity. Their wings had unfurled to reveal delicate, translucent membranes supported by a framework of fine bones. When they stretch these appendages, they span about twice the length of their bodies, still tiny but perfectly formed. It was on this third day that Art first witnessed their extraordinary abilities. The amber-scaled creature, which Art had begun to think of as Ember, sneezed violently and produced a small jet of flame that singed the edge of the cloth nest. Art quickly doused the smoldering fabric with water, his mind reeling at the implications. Dragons. He was harboring baby dragons. The following day brought more revelations. Art had placed a jar of honey on the table while preparing their food, only to turn around and find it hovering several inches above the surface. The green dragon, Glimmer, as Art now called it, was staring intently at the jar, its eyes glowing with concentration. When Art gasped, the dragon's focus broke, and the jar clattered back to the table. Most remarkable of all was the way they began to communicate with Art. It started subtly, impressions of hunger or contentment that seemed to form directly in his mind. But by the end of the first week, these impressions had evolved into more complex emotions and even rudimentary images. The blue dragon, whom Art named Sparky, after witnessing its ability to generate small electrical charges, was particularly adept at this form of communication. It could convey not just needs and feelings, but simple concepts. Curiosity about the bees Art tended, appreciation for the warmth of the fire, affection for Art himself. Art, who had spoken more words to his dragons in a week than he had to any human in the past year, found himself transformed by their presence. The chronic weight of loneliness that had settled on his shoulders after Martha's departure lifted. He had purpose again, not just the daily struggle to maintain his failing business, but a secret, wondrous responsibility that filled him with a mixture of awe and nervous energy. As the dragons grew stronger, the glitches around the farm intensified dramatically. The old ham radio now picked up strange broadcasts almost constantly. Fragments of conversations in unknown languages, mathematical sequences repeated in monotone voices, music that stirred emotions Art had no names for. The northern lights appeared nightly, directly over the farm, despite being hundreds of miles too far south for such phenomena. Animals behaved oddly. Deer approached the house fearlessly. Birds formed perfect geometric patterns in their flights. The farm's resident mice arranged small objects in what appeared to be deliberate, symbolic configurations. Art began keeping a journal, meticulously documenting the dragon's development and the increasing reality disturbances. The pages filled rapidly with observations, sketches, and questions that had no answers. The creatures grew at an astonishing rate, doubling in size every few days. By the end of 2 weeks, they were the size of house cats, their personalities distinct and increasingly complex. Sparky, the blue dragon, was methodical and observant, often spending hours watching Art's movements with intelligent eyes. Ember, the amber one, was impulsive and affectionate, prone to fiery outbursts when excited. Glimmer, the green dragon, was more reserved but displayed the strongest telekinetic abilities, often rearranging objects around the house while Art slept. The crystals from the chest, which Art had distributed around the house, grew brighter as the dragons regained their strength. They seemed to function as both energy sources and amplifiers for the dragon's abilities. When placed near the beehives during Art's daily checks, the crystals induced remarkable effects. The bees became more active despite the winter conditions, and Art noticed with astonishment that some of the honey they produced took on the same luminescent quality as the crystals themselves. It was on the 15th day after finding the dragons that everything changed. Art awoke before dawn, roused by an unnatural silence. The usual creaks and groans of the old farmhouse had ceased, as had the constant whisper of wind outside. Even the gentle hum of the refrigerator was absent, though the power indicator light still glowed. With a sense of foreboding, Art checked on the dragons. All 3 were awake, huddled together in their now spacious nest, their eyes fixed on the ceiling as though listening for something beyond human perception. When Art approached, Sparky turned to him, projecting an image so vivid it made Art stagger. A vast fleet of ominous vessels against the backdrop of stars, moving with clear purpose toward a small blue planet. Before Art could process this disturbing vision, the quality of light outside changed dramatically. What should have been the pale gray of early dawn instead took on a deep, unsettling purple hue. Art moved to the window, the dragons following close behind, their wings half extended in what seemed to be a defensive posture. The sky above the farm had darkened as though a solar eclipse had suddenly manifested. But what blocked the sun were not celestial bodies following their natural courses. Hovering in perfect formation above Art's property were ships. Thousands of them, identical in their sleek, obsidian design, each roughly the size of a commercial airliner but shaped like elongated diamonds with sharp, angular protrusions. They made no sound, created no wind disturbance. But their presence was overwhelming, a silent statement of incalculable power. As Art stood, transfixed by the impossible sight, a column of light appeared in his front yard, a perfect cylinder of intense white radiance that extended from the ground to the fleet above. Within this column materialized a figure that, while humanoid in its basic form, was clearly not human. Standing at least 7 feet tall, the being wore what appeared to be a uniform of metallic fabric that rippled with subdued rainbow hues despite the absence of direct light. Its face was elongated, with sharp features and eyes that glowed with the same intensity as the dragon's, but cold, calculating, utterly without warmth. A series of ridges extended from its forehead back across its hairless skull, giving the impression of a living crown. The being's feet did not quite touch the ground, and it moved toward Art's door with a fluid grace that defied normal physics. Art felt the dragons press against his legs, their bodies trembling, not with cold this time, but with unmistakable fear. A voice filled Art's home, though the being's mouth did not move. It resonated not just in his ears, but seemed to vibrate through every object in the house, causing the windows to hum at a frequency just short of shattering. Arthur Pendleton, the voice intoned, devoid of any emotion. I am Commander Forlag of the Kronos Guardian Force. You are harboring temporal fugitives of extreme danger classification. Surrender them immediately. Art's mouth had gone dry, his heart hammering against his ribs. He glanced down at the dragons, who looked up at him with expressions that, despite their alien features, conveyed pure terror. I don't know what you're talking about, Art managed, his voice barely above a whisper. These are just unusual pets I found. The entity called Forlag tilted its head slightly, the gesture uncomfortably mechanical. Your ignorance is noted but irrelevant. The entities in your possession are chronivores, time-consuming beings whose unchecked development poses a critical threat to established timelines. They were condemned to temporal suspension and jettisoned into a dead-end time stream. Their escape was unforeseen. As Forlag spoke, Sparky pressed more urgent images into Art's mind. Not just pictures now, but complex sequences that unfolded with narrative clarity. Art saw a civilization of beings like his dragons, peaceful and advanced, whose natural ability to stabilize timeline fluctuations made them invaluable to the cosmic order. He saw another civilization rise, beings like Forlag, who had developed technology to manipulate time itself, using it to conquer and control. The dragon's natural abilities threatened this technology, making them targets for elimination. The images showed the systematic hunting of dragons across time and space, until only a precious few remained, sending their offspring away in temporal arcs with a desperate hope that some might survive. They're refugees, Art said, his voice stronger now, fueled by the injustice he had witnessed in Sparky's visions. You're not protecting anything. You're exterminating them because they threaten your control. Forlag's eyes flashed. Your primitive understanding cannot grasp the complexities of temporal governance. These creatures destabilize our careful management of reality. They must be contained. They're just babies, Art protested. They will not remain so, Forlag replied coldly. Even now, They accelerate their own development by feeding on the temporal discontinuities they create around them. Left unchecked, they will fracture your reality beyond repair. Art felt ember press against his leg, projecting feelings of indignation and denial. Glimmer joined in, sending images that directly contradicted Forlag's claims, showing dragons healing temporal fractures, not creating them. You have exactly 5 of your minutes to comply, Forlag continued, unperturbed. If you do not surrender the chronivores, this entire farm and everything on it will be erased from the timeline. There will be no trace of your existence. This is not a threat. It is operational protocol. With those words, Forlag's projection flickered momentarily before stabilizing again, now waiting in silent impassivity for Art's decision. Art looked down at the 3 dragons, who gazed back with eyes full of intelligence and fear. In the short time they had been together, they had become family to him, the most extraordinary family a lonely old beekeeper could have imagined. The thought of handing them over to this cold, calculating entity made his stomach churn. What will happen to them if I give them to you? Art asked, playing for time while his mind raced. They will be returned to temporal suspension, Forlag stated. A humane containment relative to the alternative. Suspended animation, frozen forever, neither alive nor dead. Art thought of his bees in winter, clustered together in a state of near suspension, but with the promise of spring to awaken them. The dragons would have no spring. I can't do that, Art said softly, then with more conviction, I won't do that. Forlag's expression remained unchanged. Then preparation for timeline erasure will commence. You have 4 minutes remaining. Outside, Art saw the fleet begin to shift formation. The ships nearest to the farm descended slightly, their obsidian surfaces opening to reveal what could only be weapons, sleek appendages aimed directly at his property. The dragons were now projecting their thoughts in unison, creating a chaotic jumble of images and emotions in Art's mind. But through the confusion, he began to discern a pattern, a plan forming in their collective consciousness. They directed his attention to the crystals from their ark, which had been placed throughout the house, then to his beehives in the barn. Finally, to the old ham radio that had been acting strangely. Art didn't understand fully, but he grasped enough. You want me to connect these somehow? The crystals, the bees, and the radio. The dragons confirmed with pulses of affirmation so strong they almost gave him a headache. Without further hesitation, Art gathered the crystals into a small bag and headed for the barn, the dragons following close behind. 3 minutes remaining, Forlag's voice announced, seeming to come from the air itself. In the barn, Art found his beehives humming with unusual activity for winter. The bees seemed agitated, as though sensing the threat above. Working quickly, Art placed the crystals in a circle around his ham radio setup on the workbench. The dragons positioned themselves at regular intervals among the hives, their scales beginning to glow with increasing intensity. What frequency? Art asked aloud, his hands hovering over the radio's dials. Sparky projected a complex series of numbers into Art's mind. Without questioning how he could possibly understand such advanced concepts, Art's fingers moved across the controls, tuning the radio to impossible specifications, combining frequencies in ways the old equipment should not have been capable of handling. 2 minutes remaining, came Forlag's emotionless countdown. As Art completed the final adjustments, the dragons began to emit a low, harmonious hum that resonated with the buzzing of the bees. The crystals responded, their glow intensifying until Art had to squint against their brilliance. The radio crackled to life, broadcasting the combined frequency outward, not just through conventional radio waves, but through what Art somehow understood to be the fabric of time itself. 1 minute remaining. Outside, a new light show began as the fleet's weapons charged, creating webs of energy between ships. Art could feel it building, the power to erase not just physical matter, but the very fact of its existence from the timeline. The dragon's humming grew louder, the bees buzzing more frantic. The crystals now pulsed in perfect synchronization with both. Art felt something stirring within himself as well. the same sense of wrongness that had manifested as glitches around his farm for years. He suddenly understood that he, too, was an anomaly, a natural generating point for small temporal instabilities. It was why the dragons had been drawn to him, why their ark had emerged from its temporal suspension near his property. Art placed his hands on the radio and immediately felt a surge of energy flow through him. His lifelong connection to the natural world, to his bees, to the rhythms of the seasons, combined with his innate temporal instability and the dragon's abilities, all amplified and focused through the ancient technology of the crystals and broadcast through the simple ham radio. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Just as the fleet's weapons prepared to fire, a wave of temporal energy exploded outward from the barn. It struck the ships and seemed to short-circuit whatever technology they employed to maintain their position in normal space-time. Instead of disappearing or being destroyed, the fleet became caught in what Art could only describe as a temporal stutter, appearing, fading slightly, and reappearing in exactly the same position, over and over again like a skipping record or a buffering video. Forlag's projection flickered violently, its voice distorting. "What have you?" Interference detected, timeline compromised, reinforcements, before dissolving into static and disappearing entirely. The ships continued their bizarre repetition, frozen at the moment of their arrival, neither advancing their attack nor retreating. Art and the dragons watched in astonishment as all 12,000 vessels became a strange, permanent fixture in the sky above the farm, threatening but unable to complete their threat, trapped in an eternal moment of just having arrived. The dragons collapsed from exhaustion, their scales dimming to normal luminosity. Art wasn't in much better shape. He felt as though he had run a marathon, his entire body trembling with fatigue. But they were alive. They had defended themselves against an enemy so powerful as to be nearly godlike, using nothing but a beekeeper's tools, crystals from another time, and the combined abilities of 4 temporal anomalies, 3 dragons, and 1 lonely human. Art gathered the exhausted dragons in his arms and carried them back to the house, casting occasional glances at the extraordinary spectacle in the sky. The immediate danger had passed, but Art understood that their situation had become infinitely more complicated. They now had a fleet of time-traveling warships trapped in a temporal loop directly over their heads, likely to draw attention from anyone who happened to look up while passing the remote farm. In the days that followed, Art and the dragons recovered their strength. The crystals, which had dimmed significantly after the confrontation, gradually began to regain their glow as they absorbed excess temporal energy from the looping fleet above. The dragons showed Art how to position them to create a weak stability field around the farm, masking some of the more obvious temporal anomalies from outside detection. The dragons continued to grow and develop their abilities. They could now communicate with Art through complete concepts and memories rather than just images and emotions. From them, he learned more about their species, their culture, their history, their natural role as temporal stabilizers in a universe prone to dangerous fluctuations. He learned about the Chronos Guardian Force as well, a military organization for what humans would consider the far future, dedicated to controlling time itself through technology, viewing natural temporal entities like the dragons as threats to their monopoly. The perpetually looping fleet had unexpected effects on the farm. Excess temporal energy filtered down in unpredictable ways. Plant growth accelerated subtly, not enough to be immediately obvious to visitors, but enough that Art noticed as apple trees budding weeks ahead of schedule. The bees thrived despite the continuing winter, producing honey with remarkable properties. When Art consumed this honey, he found small injuries healing overnight, his chronic back pain vanishing, his energy levels increasing. During the 4th week after the confrontation, Art received an unexpected visitor, a representative from the U.S. government, ostensibly from a Department of Agriculture, but with a manner that suggested a more classified affiliation. The man asked pointed questions about the atmospheric phenomenon visible above Art's property. Art played the role of the confused farmer perfectly, suggesting it was probably the northern lights behaving strangely. When the agent attempted to set up monitoring equipment at the edge of the property, inexplicable malfunctions occurred. Batteries drained instantly. Electronic components rearranged themselves into useless configurations. Recording devices played back nothing but nonsensical static. After 3 days of failed attempts, the frustrated agent departed, leaving behind only a business card with a Washington, D.C. phone number and strict instructions for Art to call immediately if the phenomenon changed in any way. Art nodded solemnly, tucked the card into his pocket, and never intended to use it. More visitors followed. Scientists, UFO enthusiasts, curiosity seekers. None stayed long. The stability field generated by the crystals had the convenient side effect of inducing mild disorientation and memory lapses in humans who weren't prepared for its effects. Most left with vague recollections of having seen something interesting but ultimately explainable in the sky, and a strange beekeeper who seemed harmlessly eccentric. The dragons, now the size of large dogs, took to hiding whenever strangers approached. They had developed a playful attitude toward the humans who invaded their territory, occasionally causing minor mischief, temporary engine trouble in cars, mysteriously rearranged personal belongings, strange dreams that faded upon waking, but nothing harmful or persistent. As winter gave way to an early spring, Art's honey production reached unprecedented levels. The bees, energized by proximity to the temporal anomalies, produced far more than they should have been capable of. The honey itself had changed, taking on subtle luminescent qualities and flavors that shifted depending on when and how it was consumed. Art began selling this Vermont time shaft honey at premium prices to specialty food shops and high-end restaurants, where it quickly developed a cult following among chefs and food enthusiasts who claimed it enhanced perception and created a unique sense of well-being. Art's financial problems evaporated. Between the extraordinary honey sales and virtually non-existent utility bills, the farm now drew most of its energy directly from the temporal distortions. He paid off his debts and began renovating the old farmhouse. He expanded the barn to create a more comfortable living space for the rapidly growing dragons, incorporating the crystals into the architecture to maintain optimal conditions for their development. 3 months after the fleet's arrival, Art received another unexpected visitor, Martha. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, driving up the long farm road in a new SUV, her hair shorter than Art remembered, her face showing the subtle signs of the 5 years that had passed. She stepped out of the vehicle and stood for a long moment, staring upward at the fleet that still hovered in its endless loop above the property. When she finally looked at Art, who had emerged onto the porch at the sound of her arrival, her expression was unreadable. "I saw a news story," she said simply. "Something about atmosphere phenomena over our old farm. I thought I should check on you." Art nodded, unsure what to say to this woman who had once been the center of his world and was now effectively a stranger. "Would you like some tea?" he finally offered. Martha followed him inside, her eyes widening at the transformed interior of the farmhouse. The shabby, outdated decor had been replaced with a unique blend of rustic comfort and what could only be described as subtle otherworldliness. Furniture made from local wood, but shaped in gently impossible curves. Lighting that came from no visible sources. Walls adorned with Art's increasingly abstract paintings of temporal landscapes. "You've changed things," Martha observed, accepting the cup of tea Art handed her. "A lot of things. Life got interesting," Art replied with deliberate understatement. "So I see." Martha's gaze drifted to the window, where the fleet was visible, eternally arriving. "What are they?" Art considered how much to tell her, then decided on the simplest version of the truth. "Time travelers who wanted to take something precious from me. They got stuck." Martha studied his face, looking for signs of the mental instability she had perhaps expected to find. Instead, she saw only her former husband, older, yes, but more vital than she remembered, his eyes clear and purposeful. "And what was so precious they traveled through time to get it?" she asked. As if on cue, Sparky chose that moment to make an appearance, poking his now eagle-sized head around the corner from the kitchen. Martha gasped, her teacup clattering to the floor, but not breaking, caught mid-fall by Glimmer's telekinesis from somewhere out of sight. "My family," Art answered simply. The conversation that followed was long and complicated. Martha cycled through disbelief, fear, wonder, and finally a grudging acceptance of Art's extraordinary new reality. She met all three dragons properly, allowed them to communicate with her through their mental imagery, and heard the full story of their arrival and the confrontation with Forlag. "I always said nothing interesting ever happened here," she said at last, shaking her head in amazement. "I guess I just left too soon. Or exactly when you needed to," Art suggested gently. "I don't think I could have handled all this if we were still trying to make our marriage work." Martha smiled sadly, acknowledging the truth in his words. "We wanted different things. We still do, I expect." Before leaving, Martha asked if she could take a jar of Art's special honey. Art selected one of his finest batches, the liquid inside glowing with a soft amber light that seemed to contain tiny galaxies in constant motion. "It might help with your migraines," he said, remembering how she had suffered from them during their marriage. He didn't explain how he knew she still had them, some connection between them remaining despite everything. Martha nodded her thanks, then paused at the door. "Are you happy, Art?" Art considered the question, looking around at his transformed home, thinking of the extraordinary beings he now shared his life with, the impossible fleet that hovered overhead, the honey that practically made itself, the sense of purpose that filled his days. "I am," he said, and meant it. After Martha left, Art sat on his porch watching the perpetual sunset created by the light filtering through the fleet above. The dragons joined him, arranging themselves around his chair in companionable silence. Art's ham radio sat on the small table beside him, modified now to pick up transmissions from across time as well as space. Occasionally, they detected other refugees, beings displaced from their proper timelines, searching for safe harbor in a vast temporal ocean. Sometimes, Art and the dragons were able to help, sending guidance or warnings through the specialized frequencies they had discovered. Their farm had become a lighthouse of sorts, a fixed point in a fluid reality, offering hope to those adrift in time. Art had never imagined such a role for himself, had never aspired to anything more significant than keeping his bees alive and his bills paid. Yet here he was, a temporal anomaly himself, guardian to 3 growing dragons, caretaker of a honey operation that straddled multiple realities, with a fleet of time-traveling warships permanently decorating his skyline. The loops and paradoxes that had brought him here were too complex for even the dragons to fully explain. All Art knew with certainty was that his unremarkable life had become something extraordinary. His farm, once just a struggling piece of rural Vermont real estate, was now a crossroads of time itself. As darkness fell and the fleet above began to glow with its nightly energy discharge, creating the most spectacular Northern Lights show in Vermont history, Art smiled to himself. Life would never be predictable again, and that suited him just fine. Tomorrow he would check on his bees, bottle some timeline-infused honey, help the dragons with their temporal stabilization exercises, and perhaps tune the radio to listen for other voices adrift in time. Above all, he would remember to send silent thanks to whatever cosmic coincidence had placed those 3 fragile dragons in his path that snowy winter morning. The day his life had finally become as unpredictable as anyone could possibly wish for.